do you think that your sense of advocacy comes from studying law, or was studying law a result of an inherent advocacy that you had within you?
I think it's both, and I think what it did is it honed what I had already, because I even though you might have that sense of justice and that sense of advocacy or campaigning, whatever it is that you have in you, don't necessarily have the language or the disciplines to do it and do it effectively. And that's what studying law did for me. I think it could do for others. It gives you the discipline to be effective if you decide to become an advocate or a campaigner or to use your voice, because you really do need to have tenacity and put in the hard work to be effective. And again, you can't get through a law degree unless you're going to do those things.
Absolutely. So in 2017, obviously you took the Article 50 case, Gina Miller, to prevent, I suppose, the government from initiating Brexit without parliamentary approval. Despite the obvious kind of crime that they were committing, I guess, what was the motivation for you in particular to take the case? Why did you decide that you were the one to do something about it?
I think it was threefold. First of all, I had been watching for about 10 years or so about how the UK government was using its powers. I mean, I was actually on the march, on the Tony Blair, anti-Blair march for the war. So that's where I really became an activist. And I was concerned the way, even back then, the government was using, because this is apolitical, about in the realms of an unwritten constitution, how a government, because remember in the UK, we're only one of 3 countries who don't have a written constitution, is how that's tested by particular governments. And for example, in 2014 to 2015, Henry VIII powers were used 95 times in 1 year to change our lives. And so I was getting more and more concerned. I was looking at what the Hansard Society were doing. I was, unfortunately, my bedtime reading sometimes would be Hansard, and I'd look at debates in Parliament. So, quite a geek when it came to that. But so I actually knew what it meant to use the Henry VIII powers. I actually knew what the royal prerogative was. So having that knowledge, and then secondly, I was involved in the Brexit debate all the way back from October 2015. So I'd been on the Remain side speaking up on behalf of business, because in a very febrile environment, it was difficult to find advocates. And I think I just ticked lots of boxes, and I would go up against the usual suspects of Gove and Matthew Elliott, whoever it was from Vote Leave. And I realized from all the green room conversations that I was having with Brexiteers, that A, they never thought they would win, and B, they didn't actually have a plan for when they might win or when they did win. And in that, if you like, realm of desperation, I was incredibly concerned about what they would do, because they were obviously going to be tempted to put themselves above the law to rush things through Parliament. And if the precedent, as far as I was concerned, was set that they could put themselves above the law in domestic law, then could you imagine what they would have brought in that sense of, I said, in that mold of desperation. But thirdly, and very, very importantly, and I think this is often missed about the Article 50 case, is that if we had set that precedent and if we had broken international law, yes, we would have left, but actually European Union would have taken us to court, or could have taken us to court. And isn't it ironic where we are with the Internal Markets Bill? But also, if that had happened, no other country would sign an agreement or a deal with us until that had been resolved. So the UK could have been in limbo for, the average case going to Strasbourg can take years and years. So what would we have done as a nation in limbo? And what I find, as I said, incredibly ironic is that this government is attempting to do exactly that as we face leaving with the Internal Markets Bill and what they're intending to do in international law there. So it was bigger than just Article 50. It was about domestic law, it's about international law, and it was about the precedents that they would have set.
Yeah, so ironically enough, if they had managed to rush it through, they probably would have prevented it for years, I guess, if they were.
Yes, I mean, they really would have done whatever they wanted to do, I think, and we're in the same place again. But it was important to me that somebody brought the case. I mean, I have to say I got lots of things wrong, and I was, whilst I wasn't naive, and I've been a campaigner, so I know what abuse looks like and feels like. I really didn't think I was going to be the only person bringing my case, because, I imagined there'd be other people. My naivety was that I thought I'd stand up, start the case, and lots of people, academics, constitutional experts, lawyers, business people would think, fine, you know, of course, this makes sense. But, you know, even Brexiteers would say, this is about parliamentary sovereignty, and would join me. And every time I looked around, there was no one. And I think that was because of the abuse.
Okay. Yeah, just to pick up on the abuse, at the beginning, I think there were 2 other claimants and they dropped out beforehand, just obviously on account of all the abuse that they were receiving. And how did you manage to power through that and continue on with the case?
So what had happened was that it wasn't until we actually got permission that the names came out, and that up until that stage, once there was a press release from Mich Condré saying that they were bringing the case with claimants, I mean, their offices were attacked, the front of their office was attacked. There was a separate website where they cloned the photographs of all the Jewish people in the law firm, and they then put swastikas on them. The abuse the law firm got was extraordinary. And then when my name came out, as I started getting it, and the other 2 who were very wealthy, very well-known British businessmen decided that they couldn't proceed. And I think that was absolutely the right thing, because they had to protect their families, they had to protect their businesses. I wasn't as well known, and as I said, I placated my think other people would join me. But the abuse was something I didn't expect it to be so personal. I thought they would attack the argument, not me. The fact that I was a woman of color, it exposed thoughts that I didn't think we had in British society. I think in a nutshell, the 3 main ones were that I couldn't be bright enough to bring the case on my own. I must have had really powerful men behind me telling me what to do. The second thing was that it couldn't be my money. I must have got it from, again, lots of rich men, or that I'd made it by some sort of spurious means. It couldn't have been that I'd run successful businesses, and it was my money. And I think the third thing was that it wasn't my place, that I should have been grateful that Britain gave me a home. And therefore, you know, as somebody who's come to the UK, bearing in mind I was born British, but that seemed to elude them. And then the attack from certain media. I mean, the press attack was something I didn't expect, because I thought that the press would see that they weren't just damaging me or the case or the rule of law or the judges. I thought they could see that they would be damaging a central pillar of our society, the stability of our society, but that didn't stop them. And then the abuse then, you know, exploded into death threats against me, my family, my children. So I was looked after by a terrorist squad for 4 years, which is something I never expected. But the more the abuse came, I have a strange mindset, being a campaigner for nearly 30 years now, is that in an odd way, it gave me the strength to carry on, because I started thinking, if these people, these voices think that it is their right to express themselves in this way, and somehow they were more mainstream, then somebody had to stand up and not be bullied by them, because ultimately, I don't want them to be the voices that form the future that my children have to live in, and my children's children. So in an odd way, it gave me more strength once I'd sort of thought it through and internalized it and worked out how I deal with it. And that's what I do with my campaigning whenever I get abuse, is I don't panic. I try and figure out how I'll maneuver my way through it and take strength from, if you like, them trying to attack me, and turning it round and fueling it in a way that's positive rather than negative.
Yeah. I suppose on kind of 2 levels, how did you manage to deal with that on a personal level, being kind of thrust into the public consciousness in such a horrific way? And how did that affect you personally, I suppose? It was,
sometimes it was emotionally absolutely exhausting, because what happened is I developed a bit like an animal, I was always on high alert. So everywhere I went, well, we stopped going out very much. And again, an irony is, I suppose our family went into lockdown sort of 3-4 years ago. We stopped going out. I would always go out in sort of, you know, try to look in disguise, if you like. I stopped going out with my children, because I thought if I was attacked, then they would be safe. So we stopped doing all of that. But that, on always being on high alert, you know, what is that person coming towards you going to do? Are you going to be safe? Was really exhausting. So some days I would just go home and cry. It was just so exhausting. And there were times when I thought about giving up. And I have to say, when we won the Article 50 case, I really sighed with relief and thought, it's over. 2 hours later, when the government said they were going to appeal, I really couldn't believe it. Because I thought their arguments were so weak, I couldn't really understand what they were appealing. Secondly, I thought, oh my gosh, so this abuse is going to carry on again for another 6 months, however long. And then thirdly, I thought, I'm going to have to find a lot more money because I'm funding this. So I didn't expect them to appeal the first case. But I think, again, and lots of conversations I've had with people behind the scenes and in senior positions in different political arenas have said it was purely to give them more time. That was really, they knew they wouldn't win again, but it gave them more time to try and figure out what to do. But it was exhausting, absolutely exhausting.
And obviously one of the most horrific examples of the abuse you received was from Viscount Phillips, who made a threat against your life in a Facebook post. And you took a court case against him. What made you do that? What made you take a stand against that particular example of abuse?
Well, again, the Facebook group, because I didn't know this is how sort of it worked, but this closed Facebook group, somebody got very alarmed and sent me a sort of a screenshot of it, where he'd offered £5,000 for someone to run me over. And I discussed with the squad, the police squad who were looking after me, and then we spoke to the CPS, and I said to them, if I took this case against him, it was actually about setting a precedent, because nobody had been brought to court or prosecuted for malicious communications or threat to kill on a social media platform. So it was about, again, standing up and making sure that this would set a precedent in future. Now, I have to say, it didn't quite work out that way, because with the second court case, with the prorogation case, there was a Facebook page, there was a GoFundMe page set up. And that had blatantly in the headline, it said £10,000 to hire a hitman to kill Gina Miller. And GoFundMe had that up for 5 months. And when, again, a member of the public kindly sent me a screen grab and we approached GoFundMe, they kept saying, oh, they didn't know who it was. I mean, they sent a tiny little, oh, we're sorry. But my view on that is, well, you can't have any algorithms. You don't have any duty of care. How could you possibly have missed that and have it be up for 5 months? Now, my precedent in the first case didn't quite work out, because another man from up north, Mr. Haslam, has been prosecuted for that in lockdown. He got £200 fine for my distress, which is less than you get for a speeding offence in the UK, in most speeding offences. And he got let off with, he didn't go to court. The Viscount had 6 weeks in prison in Brixton. Mr. Haslam got suspended sentence. So I'm looking at it and thinking something has to be done. So again, I'm looking at this abuse online and thinking I need to use that in a positive way. So what I'm using my experience to say is that I'm calling on the British government to now bring the online harms bill to Parliament next year, because I do believe that social media platforms have a duty of care to their users. And if crime has moved offline to online, be that malicious communications, abuse, threats of violence, racism, even things like raising money illegally, then those platforms who are getting at the moment acting with impunity and are getting a license to become billionaires, most of them, have to have a duty of care and responsibility. So I'm going to use the examples of what I've suffered to say, I'm sorry, this is not good enough. We have to move to legislating both a duty of care for online platforms, but actually I believe we need to go even further and bring in an online regulator, because at the moment they fall through the cracks of either publishers, online platforms, financial services. I think we've got to move to a place of safety online, just as we experience offline.
Absolutely. You mentioned there that you brought a second case in 2019 against the UK government. How did you feel going up against them again? Did you feel kind of, was there a sense of confidence from the first case, or was it just, oh God?
No, I mean, I was, the pre-action protocol to it, I didn't actually think we were going to have to do it, because I was really reticent, but when it was Dominic Raab stood up and said that they were going to prorogue Parliament, and then I started hearing a lot of rumours from, you know, I work cross-party with a lot of people on different campaigns that I've run. I always campaign on different causes, and so I was beginning to hear about what was the true nature. So I was told in July of 2019 that the government, when the Benn Act came in, they were, if you remember, they were very confident that it wouldn't stop them doing what they wanted to do. And I was told that the reason for that was that they had this thought in their mind that they would prorogue Parliament and then not bring it back until after the 31st of October. So they would prorogue Parliament in September, extend it, and they would just leave it no deal. It would be, so they'd never bring back Parliament, which sent so many shockwaves through my head and to my heart. And so in July, we sent off, I got hold of my old team, we all got together and we were all equally alarmed and concerned. So we thought what we'd do is we'd start the pre-action protocol. So we sent off the first few letters to Boris Johnson when he was running for leadership, because we thought that he would win. And all through that summer, it's quite odd because both those summers in 2017, 2019, my team were amazing. They worked during their holidays, all night, all day. Imagine, it normally takes years to put together these sorts of cases. And the fact that we put them together in a matter of weeks was extraordinary. I mean, I cannot ever thank them enough. But up until the Monday night before Boris Johnson announced he was going to prorogue Parliament, I was assured over and over again that they were not going to prorogue Parliament. They had to take, they went to great lengths to reassure me, quoted lots of constitutional law, lots of public law to back up why they couldn't do it themselves. And all along, I kept saying to my team, I'm sorry, but it's that old saying, when you protest too much. And I was suspicious, and I kept thinking, I'm sorry, we're just going to carry on. And I persuaded the team to carry on, and we prepared the case. So on the Monday evening, when we got our last letter, and the Monday evening at 5 o'clock was the last letter to me saying we were not going to prorogue Parliament. 10 o'clock the next morning, Boris Johnson made the announcement that they would, and we had till 4 o'clock that Tuesday to file our case. And I think they strung us along thinking that we wouldn't have enough time, but we were fully prepared, and we filed at 4 o'clock on the Tuesday. But I was more terrified. You say, was I more confident? I wasn't, because in the first case, we had agreed a fee cap. In this one, I filed with no fee agreement in place. So, and this was a much more difficult case, and I wasn't sure that the courts would be that willing to accept justiciability in this case. So the cost to me, financial cost, much as anything else, would have been absolutely horrendous if I'd lost.
You mentioned there that you were more terrified this time around. How did you work up the courage then to go again? Just the general sense?
I just instinctively knew that I had to do it. I mean, for them to set again the precedent because I kept thinking by doing this, they were actually putting the Queen in a very difficult position. We were going to then, what would that say if we had left, again, the same thoughts? What if we had just dropped out with no deal? That would contravene the withdrawal agreement. We'd be back. As I say, it's ironic that they're putting themselves in the position that I was trying to stop them getting into. But it also would have set this precedent that Parliament would have been, they could shut out Parliament whenever they wished by, again, using the royal prerogative in a way it was never designed for. And I think that's what we're seeing now, is that the stretches, the limits of our constitution and the rule of law is really being tested by what I would consider an unscrupulous government. And all my fears, unfortunately, are coming true. But Parliament is sovereign, and I just have to sit and watch. And it fills me with despair that not enough parliamentarians are standing up and saying what they should be saying, in my view.
I suppose, just on a side note, you were represented by Lord Pannick in both of these cases. Was there anything in particular that you learned from his advocacy during that experience?
I have to say there was, it was pure joy for me having Lord Pannick, because he reminded me so much of my father. My father, years ago, I don't know if you've ever read, there's a John Mortimer play, Voyage Round My Father. And Mortimer says in his play, his father sent words into the courtroom as if they were soldiers into battle. And that was a phrase I always, applied to my father. And when Lord Panic was standing up, I just thought, that's the same phrase. And his ability to take the most complex of arguments and distill it down into something where ordinary people who are tuning in could understand is an extraordinary skill. But he's also a very humble man. And again, reflections of my father. So I found it incredibly emotional because of those references to my father, intellectually incredibly stimulating, and just in awe of his abilities.
And I suppose I think I can predict the answer to this one, but has your experience in the courts catalyzed a faith in the British legal system, or has it just been something the complete opposite?
No, it's actually made me really question the whole process of judicial review. I know the government are, bringing in this independent review. I think for the wrong reasons, because I actually think there does need to be a review of the whole the independent look at the judicial review system, because I think what it really showed me is that, the whole idea you do have to have money without legal aid. There's something wrong with the system when you have a lack of legal aid, and that creates a lack of access to justice. And I think it's really, really important that we have access to justice. And so I think that's important. I think the fact that that certain parties can actually, as the government did, just refuse to submit evidence is wrong. And I think the way that the judges were politicized is extremely worrying. So whilst there are positives, there are many worrying elements of my experience that continue to concern me.
And I guess on more of a day-to-day inspection of your life, I suppose, obviously much of your activism revolves around the legal sphere and protecting the rule of law, but day-to-day you work in the financial services, and I was just wondering what made you pursue a career in that area, and also how is your work with the True and Fair campaign correlated with your activism regarding the rule of law?
I sort of accidentally ended up in financial services because after I don't know if you know, but so I was so excited because of my father being my hero. I couldn't wait to graduate from law and go into the legal profession. But I never took my finals because I was brutally sexually attacked a month before my finals. And I was offered a first, I was on course for first, and I just felt it was wrong to take something that I hadn't earned. So my plan was always to go back a year later, but the idea when I was in recovery, if you like, from such a trauma, I couldn't really bring myself to go back to the law. So I sort of started working in different spheres, and I decided I'd go back to university actually and study something different. So I studied, I went back and did a degree in marketing and one in human resource management, and that then took me into the world of marketing. And whilst I was studying, my dissertation, my master's, was actually in financial services. And I realized that it was just a sector that really was not fit for purpose and was really led by marketing rather than its social good and the products and services I saw as it really being essential to society. So I thought that I could change it. And I sort of went in with a mindset of improving and campaigning. So I went into the sector with a campaigning mindset thinking, I could go in and challenge the status quo in a sector that I think is very misunderstood because no public purse is ever going to fund everybody in our society. So we do have to have a financial services sector, especially a savings and a pension sector, which is better fit for purpose. I'm still campaigning. I started in '96. I definitely lot more to do. I mean, I've managed to, I've used law to create change in my sector. So I've written text in 3 EU directives that came in that changed things over the last few years. Unfortunately, I think most of that will go as we leave the EU. I think a lot of those regulations will be dropped. But I'll carry on fighting for the UK financial services because I think the regulation, the governance, the legal protections there have to be improved. They're simply not fit for purpose as we stand.
It's quite interesting the way that the kind of, I suppose, advocacy that you could associate with a career in the law, you sort of applied that to a financial standpoint. Yeah,
that's exactly what I've done. And I've done the same. I was involved in campaigning to stop modern day slavery, and I helped fund and was involved with the report on the drafting of the modern day slavery bill that Mrs. May brought in 2014. And now I'm looking at the online harms bill. So I see that idea of using the law, because the rule of law, when it's in the political arena, means policies, and policies are about, and legislation is about how we live our lives. And so that's a connection, the human connection, that I try and bring to everything I do when I look at it through the lens of law.
Absolutely, fantastic. Obviously, Brexit was probably the British government's power grab in years gone by, and probably is continuing to be. But you mentioned recently in a Guardian article, I believe it was, you see the British government kind of utilising the coronavirus pandemic as a power grab. And I was just wondering if you could expand on that a little bit more in terms of what you think they're doing.
I think across the world, even before the pandemic hit, we'd already seen a move towards dismantling the rule of law, and the judiciary. Our constitutions are being, challenged across the world. And I think what is, there's many people take a crisis and will see it as an opportunity. And I think, unfortunately, even before COVID, the direction of travel of our government was towards a more right-wing ideology, where the separation of the rule of law and the independence of the judiciary was already under attack. And I think under cover of COVID, as I call it, I think it's allowed them to really accelerate that. If you look at what the powers that actually in the Coronavirus Act, and I try to implore MPs cross-party this time not to just nod through the 6-month extension, but the way this government is using secondary legislation, SIs, is extraordinary. Between now and the end of the year, before the end of the transition period, there's something like 250 to 300 SIs that are going to need to go through Parliament. And you have to get to page 150, 155 before you actually see what else they've slipped in. And a perfect example is the Internal Markets Bill. If you look at those three sections, section 42, 43, and 45, which is now actually section 47, I mean, they are blatantly putting themselves above both domestic and international law. So what you've got is a closing down of scrutiny, of transparency and accountability, and the idea that Parliament, that the executive is not answerable to our elected representatives is extremely worrying.
Yeah, there's definitely I suppose there's no real consistency in what they're doing as well, which is obviously a key rule of law paradigm, I suppose, in terms of the way that they're initiating different moves and stuff like that. On a more, I suppose, serious note or speculative note, do you believe that the British government's erosion of civil liberties that you've just mentioned, do you think that that's slowly leading towards a kind of all-out authoritarianism, or even a fascist state, I suppose, for want of a softer term?
I think more authoritarian, and the reason I say that is that when I mentioned earlier that I was on these panels and green rooms, just debating. So there were intellectual debates at that point, because remember, they never really thought they were going to win, or there was, they didn't think it was the public would be brave enough, is what I was told. But in those rooms, I quite often listened to conversations, and there was a real belief in the ideology. I mean, it's not that they were thinking of something, they weren't saying things they didn't believe, but there is this belief that, we've become too libertarian, that there are too many, I mean, these are sort of things, some of the things I was told, is that, the reason we have such breakdown in our society and young people and gang cultures, that we have too many women in the workforce, that we obviously have allowed in too many immigrants, that we are devaluing, our values, our British values are being diluted. The fact that we shouldn't, employers, why do they have to have the burden of health and safety regulation? They should be able to hire and fire more the way they want to. There is a real move towards, we are the bosses and we should be able to earn our money and run the country the way we see. And that is the sort of mindset that is driving the ideology of the government we have now in power. And it's not just the politicians. You have to follow the money as well and look at where the funding is coming from. And it is coming from people who do believe in lower regulations, lower standards. And when it comes to food, for example, again, one of the things I was told is that, why am I so worried about, food standards? Because if you've got money, you can buy the better stuff. And if you don't, then you buy the cheaper stuff. So there is a very, I'm worried that the gaps and the divisions in society will increase, because we all worry from where we stand with our values, but if you have a different value system, then why would you stop doing what you're doing?
Absolutely. Just, I suppose, one small question from me before we move on to the Q&A from those who are watching. Do you think that that move towards authoritarianism, do you think that that is intentional on the government's behalf, or is it just a product of the way that they organically behave? Or do you think that they are constantly trying to consolidate power, if you know what I mean?
No, I think there are, from what I can gather, because I'm apolitical, I try and listen, especially people who don't agree with me. So because I want to, it's that going back to that advocacy point of view, is you're trying to understand the other side. And I try and spend a lot of my time understanding the other side. I think from what I can gather, some of it is opportunistic and sort of out of desperation, because we just don't know what's going to happen. So let's take the power while we can. And there's some of it that is very much ideologically driven. If you take someone like Jacob Rees-Mogg and read the book his father wrote, if you then look at a pamphlet that was written in 2015 by Priti Patel, Dominic Raab, Kwasi Kwarteng, and Rishi Sunak on free ports, if you read that, this was before where we are today, and when you read those pamphlets and you read what they were writing and you read what Rishi thinks about free ports, this is a direction of travel that is more ideological for certain members of our political class.
Okay. So just like, thanks very much for that. I really appreciate it. I think we'll just open it up now for a Q&A from those who are watching. Yeah. So we have a question from Aileen Kavanagh, who asks, do you think that the Human Rights Act will be scrapped?
I think there's a lot of, I think if you look at the scope of the, a slightly different answer, if you look at the scope of what's in the independent review of the judiciary and a judicial review, I think you can see the direction of travel from the way that review has been actually, if you look at the scope and the terminology, I think it is leading towards that. So I think that is a direction of travel, I'm afraid.
Okay. And Elizabeth Ring asks if you have any role models in your life.
Oh, I do. I have to say Maya Angelou is probably one of the most, you know, my book is called Rise because of her. And then Mandela, who I think, you know, being a lawyer, I have to say two of the things I learned from really listening, and I had the pleasure of listening and to him and meeting him, is that he said, you know, you have to listen to other people's voices. You know, don't be the first one to speak up. Listening and taking people's point of view and then speaking is one of the best way of actually becoming an advocate and becoming a leader. And I think the second thing he told me was that always sit in a circle. Never sit there somebody is, and he always would rearrange the chairs. He used to get to meetings early, even when he was quite elderly. He'd get there early and rearrange chairs to make sure that people were always in a circle. So he's definitely one of my role models. And I think going back quite a long way, and for quite different reasons, George Eliot is one of my role models, because people forget not only was she challenging in the fact that she was an author, but she was actually one of the first businesswomen who invested in the great India company. And she was an entrepreneur and a businesswoman as well as an author, which is quite an extraordinary thing to have done at that time in society.
Amazing. Emma Armstrong also asks, did you anticipate the UK's vote for Brexit at the time? And to what extent do you think social media influenced the vote, for example, Cambridge Analytica?
Oh, I think there is no doubt that there were data companies that was doing data mining. I think the UK, I've said it before on record, I think the UK was used as a laboratory. It was the first mass national experiment. Cambridge Analytica had already tried influencing this. We know this, the independent vote in Scotland. They'd already been involved in the Nigerian election. Later on, we knew they were involved in Catalonia. They were definitely involved. But I probably differ with some people on this, in that I think whilst they were involved, I have traveled up and down the country to Brexit leaving areas, and most of my debating in that time from October 2015 to the referendum were in Brexit voting parts of the country. And a lot of those people do not have access to social media. Remember, we are a country where we're not really connected. Connectivity is not a great thing outside cities. So whilst it inflected, if you like, urban conurbations, when it came to people who felt they had nothing to lose and nobody was listening to them, they weren't influenced as much as people think they were, because they couldn't actually get to them. So they tried leafleting and that sort of thing, but they weren't actually as effective purely because of lack of connectivity.
I suppose just a small question for me on that. What do you think did influence them? Just the socioeconomic backgrounds and stuff like that? Or?
I think one of the things that was incredibly underestimated, and I know this, were the boots on the ground. So you had people who'd figured out the Brexit Party. So you had on one level, you had the Cambridge Analytica going on. And what they did is they identified the type of people who they could sway. And then you had the boots on the ground where people were going leafleting, dropping, going to football clubs, going to reading clubs, going to libraries, where people were getting, if they didn't have a computer at home, they were using libraries. They would go to garden centers. They knew where the people they could influence went to, and they literally infiltrated them, but in person, not just online. So the combination of offline and online to the particular targets was very, very well orchestrated and executed.
Yeah, that's very interesting. We have a question from Anya Doyle, who asks, do you see the authoritarianism that you see rising in the UK, rising in other countries around the world? And how do you think countries can best help prevent its rise? Should the method be legal, political, or something else?
I think it's got to be a combination. Because one of the spreaders of this poison is social media. That's why I think we have to be very careful, and there has to be a duty of care for online. Who could have imagined that you'd have this? We all accept the good that social media does, but it is basically a tool for spreading falsehoods. So there has to be more, the law has to come into play, I think, in regulation when it comes to online. I think what we also need is a better class of politicians. I'm sorry, but around the world, we're moving towards professional politicians, and people don't trust them. They don't give a straight answer. They don't really put the country first. They put their parties first. The idea of this collective responsibility that they hide behind, or a manifesto that they hide behind. I'm sorry, but you should put your country and the people in it before yourself. And the fact that they don't have, I would love to see the MPs only be able to serve for 2 terms, so it's not then their livelihood. So I think we need to look at platforms, we need to look at the class, the people who are going to politics, and I think something else is on an individual basis. I think we have to take responsibility too and raise our civic voices. We have to be more alert to what's going on, and even at the local level, be more involved, because if the political class isn't working and the legal profession and judiciary is being trashed, then who is it that's going to take on responsibility? And I think us, with our civic voices, we have to rise up and ensure that we speak up and we change the world and where the direction of travel, because we will be complicit otherwise. We wake up one day and we will not want to live in the world we have, but then we never did anything to change it. So I think we have to all get together, especially all of you today. I mean, it's your world and your future, and I think you have to take on a sense of responsibility.
Just on that, do you think conversely, the kind of public opinion kind of moving against career politicians almost contributes to authoritarianism in a way? Because then you get people like Donald Trump in America coming along, and his whole platform being that he's not a career politician, that he's somebody else. So do you think you can?
I meet fantastic people in local government, councillors. I mean, there are really amazing people out there in the community working at local level. The problem is, it's not just social media, it's the media itself, the attacks on politicians. Okay. It's so unfair. Why would you want to put yourself in that limelight, in that life? And I think in the UK, I remember speaking to Sherry Blair about this, Mrs. Blair, and she was saying, she was seen as a first lady, but the way she was attacked in the UK press compared to the American first lady or, Spain, France, it just doesn't happen. The press have been complicit in this as well. They've destroyed not just the trust that people have in politicians, but actually they've put off people. But social media, to be attacked, so again, going back to social media, I mean, female politicians, we know from the data that in the UK, just before the December election, 19 female politicians stood down, and their number one reason was because of the attacks and death threats and sexual violence and rape threats they get on a daily basis. That is just not right.
Yeah, terrific. We have another question from Honora Woodward, kind of building upon that previous question, who asked, do you think there's any hope for combating the increasing racism, xenophobia and sexism, which seems to have appeared alongside the rise of far-right politics and authoritarianism?
I think absolutely. Don't let them just get away with it. I mean, we have to speak up. Don't be bullied, because they win if we stay silent. And I think that is the thing we have to do, is because I've discovered in 30 years of being a campaigner that most people who are abusers are actually bullies. And the thing is with bullies is you have to stand up to them. And, you know, if you're silent, they will fill the void with their voices. And so we have to all stand up. And I say, it's the small things, because sometimes you feel, gosh, this is, what can I do? It's so big, what can I do? It's everywhere, anywhere you see it, however small it is, you've got to call it out. Because if you don't call out the small stuff, then the perpetrators think, oh, well, I can get away with the next level. Actually, we have to call out the small stuff. And if you can't do it yourself, do it with others. You know, there is strength in community, there's strength in coming together. And I think we have to do it together. We just cannot afford to stay silent.
We just have two more questions here. So Helen Kelly asks, is it time for a codified written constitution in the UK?
You know, I would have said no in the past. Now, I'm not so sure. I think maybe if we're moving to a time where politicians have no regard for the integrity of our constitution, then I think we do have to codify it. But I would say maybe I'm more in favor of codifying part of the constitution. Human rights, equalities, parliamentary sovereignty and powers. I think we don't have to codify everything. So I think there is an argument for having a partially codified constitution. And then we think that we are actually, the UK is only one of 3 countries in the world that doesn't have a codified constitution. It does make you think, well, why are we in the minority? So I think maybe it is time for that, a really serious conversation about codification.
Marin Carton also asks, do you think that legal systems should prioritize holding individual keyboard warriors accountable for online platforms like GoFundMe? Or do you think that both are important? I
think they're both important, because it's not just a medium, it's a message, and the medium is a platform. They are allowing these perpetrators to go online, but it's got to be individuals as well, because it's not just abuse. When I've been working with my terrorist team, one of the things I didn't actually appreciate, and I've realized, is that hate crime has actually moved online. So on these platforms, you also get a lot of trafficking, modern day slavery, money laundering is happening, drug deals are happening. You know, this is where it's happening, and they're hiding in plain sight because people are not actually looking at what they are, what they're doing, who they are. There's also a lot of funding of right-wing organizations. Even through COVID, we know that there have been appeals going up on platforms saying, you know, can't bury this person, you know, real heart-wrenching stories. And when you look behind them, you do the due diligence, they're actually not who they say they are. So I think it has to be the platforms, but it has to be individuals. The other thing is that the keyboard warriors, as your questioner termed them, hide behind anonymity, and they think that they can get away with it. So, for example, you know, it was a great shock to the Viscount when he was caught. I remember the police saying when they knocked on his door, he couldn't believe that they'd found him. The same's happened with the chap from GoFundMe, but also I've had 8 other what's called cease and desist red cards where the police, before they charge. And every occasion, they all say unanimously, how did you find us? So if the word goes out that actually you can't stay anonymous, that's a very powerful signal to send as well, that, you know, we know who you are, where you are, and we can come and find you.
Absolutely. I think there's just one last question. I think it's quite a fitting note to end on. So you have Eve Cassidy, who says, Ms. Miller, you're such an inspiration to young people, young women especially. What advice would you give to young women who are entering the workforce?
Stay alert. And the reason I say that is under that note of covered of COVID, we are already seeing, Cassie, that there is a rise of misogyny happening in the workplace. Some of the, this idea about women can work remotely from home, maybe think about working part-time. Again, research, this is not, I always look at the data, not just perceptions on what's in the news. So McKinsey brought out a report last week showing that 25% of women who are working from home are already saying that they're feeling as though they're being discriminated against, they're not being included in conference calls, Zoom calls, they're finding out about things afterwards. So be cautious and ensure that you really are engaged in whatever profession and company you go to, and don't allow them to shut them out, because there seems to be building this idea that you can put women to one side, because it's the opposite of presenteeism. It's people are arguing that presenteeism was a bad thing in the workplace. Now, if women aren't there, somehow there is a danger, and we're already seeing the data, that they will be, all the years of equalities and that we fought for in diversity could be sadly rolled back.
Brilliant. I'm very sorry, we actually just have one more question, which
That's okay.
because it's from my lecturer, so I don't want to fail the rest of the year. She asks, were you pleased or disappointed with the impact of the Miller decision? Although it was a legal success, how do you assess its political impact?
Great question. And I have to say, in both cases, in the Article 50 case, I was so disappointed, because I thought it created opportunity for MPs to actually have a proper debate and talk about things like the impact studies and ask the government about the strategy. They just rubber stamped it. They didn't have any of that debate. And in the prorogation case, the day after, when I saw Attorney General Cox stand up and that whole fish market performance in Parliament, I just literally hid behind my hands. And I thought, I've just endangered myself, my family, given up, invested all this again for this. I was really, really disappointed in the performance of MPs cross-party.
Yeah, brilliant. Listen, Gina, thank you very, very much for speaking to us today. I really appreciate it. It's been
my absolute pleasure. And I have to say, thank you again, as I said.
No problem.
I don't often get medals, and this will definitely take pride of place, and it's really, really kind of you. Thank you.
It's an absolute privilege to speak to you, so thank you very much, and congratulations.
Thank you, everyone, and bye-bye.
Thank you.